Good morning. Today I want to talk about a subject which should be of grave concern to the entire nation, the politicization of the Indian Army. I'm talking of Indian Army and not the Indian military for two reasons. The first reason is that the strength of the Indian Army is structured around manpower, whereas the strength of the other two services, the Air Force and the Navy, they are structured around weapon platforms, they have less manpower. And the second reason is that in the Indian military war fighting thinking, the Indian Army will be the lead service in war. And should we have a lot of senior army officers who are politicized, this can lead to disastrous consequences. Hence the worry. There are a lot of retired generals today who are vocal, who are saying that the politicization of the Indian Army should be stopped. My response to them is that the Indian Army is politicized, and this happened in the year 2014. Because when you are politicized, your professional edge gets blunted. But this is something I will talk a little later. Let me first tell the viewers, at a time when I say in 2014 the Indian Army got politicized, what was it? What was the threat it was up against? It was up against the main threat of China. And coincidentally in 2014, the Americans formally acknowledged China not as a rising power but as a risen power. And this was done by President Barack Obama in his inaugural address himself when he spoke about the second Sputnik moment. And this was about China. Now, Sputnik moment has come to be identified as a strategic surprise because the first Sputnik moment was in 1957 when Americans were completely taken by surprise when they saw the Soviet Union send a satellite in space. So what they did was the next year in 1958 they created Defense Advanced Research Project Agency, DARPA for short. Now the task of the DARPA was to think ahead about technology and see that Americans were never surprised the second time. Sputnik moment should not happen again. So here they were helped with the Department of Defense or the Pentagon, where the Pentagon would think about offset strategies. Offset strategy basically means that you identify your peer competitor and then you see how asymmetrically you can gain an advantage over the adversary and you stay ahead in the game. That is the offset strategy. So the first offset strategy was enunciated in 1960 by President Eisenhower, and this was against the Soviet Union. Now the worry was that insofar as the Soviets were concerned, for them quantity had a quality of its own. So they could amass a lot of tanks, a lot of armament in the European theatre. The challenge for America was that should they match the tank for tank, gun for gun, or how should they respond? So the first offset strategy was bringing the tactical nuclear weapons in the picture. The Americans decided that their missiles, rockets and artillery shells, they will have tactical nuclear weapons to stop the conventional attacks of the Soviet Union. This worked very well for about a decade. When in the 1970s, the Americans again realized that the Soviet Union was catching up very fast. It had developed tactical nuclear weapons and it had developed much better conventional capabilities and again in large quantities. This is when maintaining the lead was always very important for the Americans. So they came up with the second offset strategy. Now the second offset strategy was how do we look deep and we shoot deep with conventional capabilities whose effect would be comparable with the tactical nuclear weapons. This was the whole idea, because that would be usable unlike perhaps the tactical nuclear weapons. So the philosophy was look deep, shoot deep with accuracy. And how do you do this? You have your sensors, you have the command post, you have the shooters, responders. they all had to be connected by what is called the networks, the battle networks. So the key to this whole philosophy was battle networks, and this worked very well. In fact, they did not get the opportunity to showcase their capabilities to the Soviet Union, but the world saw it in the 1999 Gulf War, which the Americans fought with the Iraqi army. And they showcased their battle networks. Now, then the US military got embroiled for 13 years after 9/11 in the counter-terror operations. And that is when, in those 13 years, it was suddenly discovered in 2014, the realization came that instead of the Americans taking the lead every time, the Chinese had taken the lead. Chinese had so many things going for them, which the Russians never had. And the things were, they had the money, they created a scientific temper, they created an ecosystem, a military ecosystem, and they had the political will to make the plans and implement the plans on what? On artificial intelligence. This is what the Americans realized in 2014. So the third offset strategy, incidentally, was trying to follow or to keep pace with the Chinese, because the feeling was that in certain areas of artificial intelligence autonomy, the Chinese had gone ahead, the PLA had gone ahead. For example, it was felt by the Americans that what were the price things, the networks, which they had created in the second offset strategy. First of all, the PLA created what came to be known as the system destruction capability strategy, where they could destroy those networks. They had the capability. And it was basically the end of the traditional networks. Why end? Because now the artificial intelligence was being put in the weapon systems. The weapon system never needed a network, a connection to the ground or to a controller sitting somewhere. On their own, the weapon systems, which came to be known as the lethal autonomous weapons. Now it is said that they will be able to decide for themselves, after they are given the instructions by the human, how to go, how to plan, and how to engage the target. So it was the end of traditional networks. And more important than that, what worried the Americans was that the Chinese had created intelligence and autonomous networks which could think for themselves. They could bind the virtual domains of war and the physical domains of war. Because they were thinking, they could hasten up the speed of war, which came to be known as the hyper war. This is what we talk about. So these were the capabilities in 2014 that the PLA had. I'm talking of 7 years back, which spurred the Americans to come up with the third offset strategy. Now let's see in 2014 what was going on in India. First of all, the Indian military, considering that we have a border with the PLA, with China, and it's a disputed border, they should have kept note, they should have known the progress of these offset strategy and how the Americans now were anxious, if not worried, about the PLA capabilities. That was not done. More than that, when Prime Minister Narendra Modi, he held his first combined commanders conference in October 2014, he made two statements, very important. The first he said is that full-scale wars are ruled out. But his second statement was absolutely spectacular. It was mind-boggling. He said, the threat may be known, but the enemy may be invisible. So the enemy is invisible, which basically means that the enemy is the terrorist. That is your primary threat. Here was a prime minister who was giving the threats to the military leadership. What should have happened is, or what normally must happen in any professional military, is that the prime minister or the government tells the military that, look, these are our political objectives and we want to use military capabilities to achieve these objectives. it is the responsibility of the military leadership then to assess the threats. This is their main task. And based on that, then they devise their military aims and see how they can meet the aspiration of the nation, what the nation desires. So when the Prime Minister starts giving the threat, which is something absolutely unique, and he spelled out that the threat is terrorism, so you keep doing the counter-terror operations, nobody questioned it. I remember even in Force Office, we had two retired 3-star officers, one from the army, one from the navy, visiting us regularly. Instead of debating and saying that, look, this is wrong, how can a Prime Minister give the threat? They were actually discussing with me, wow, this is something very great, and see how we can dovetail this and how we can push this further. Now, if this is not politicization of the army, when the army does not do its task, what it is supposed to do, the key task, and the Prime Minister tells them the threat, that means their professionalism is gone, it is no longer there, and it is a politicized army because now it is doing what the Prime Minister or the ruling party wants them to do. Now, there are a lot of people who will turn back and tell me that, look, politicization happened earlier also, in time of Prime Minister Nehru, with General Thimaiya. No, that was not politicization. If you are favoring somebody out of turn, if you are disregarding military advice, it is something entirely different. There is no Prime Minister in this country who spelled out the threats. There is no Prime Minister in this country who wore the combat fatigues. What does the combat fatigue signify? I mean, the veterans, everybody should be thinking about it, that he had assumed the role of a topmost operational commander of the military. And this happened in 2014. The results came, they followed. The first result we saw was in 2016 surgical strikes. Now in this surgical strike, completely unthinkable, it is the Director General of Military Operations, General Ranbir Singh, in a press conference the day after the so-called strikes were done. He called them surgical strikes. Were they surgical strikes? You do surgical strike against legitimate military targets. On the one hand, he said that this was done against terrorists. Terrorist is a non-military target. How can you call it surgical strike? Not only that, he actually announced publicly that this is the end of mission. In other words, and he had spoken to the DGM of Pakistan before that, before going public, basically saying that we are not ready for escalation. Now you hit a non-military target, cover it up as some military target, surgical strike, which is not, and everybody keeps quiet about it. The only person who did not keep quiet was the Foreign Secretary then, Jai Shankar, who is now the External Affairs Minister. In one of the parliamentary hearings, he made it very clear that this surgical strike was nothing more than specific targets. Targets were specific targets with limited caliber, shallow penetration. They were counter-terror operations. And he said the only thing about this, what had not happened before, was that the government took credit for it, made it look very big. And that is the truth. But even today, there are so many generals who are taking pride. I mean, there is one general 3-star who has gone and written a book also called India Bravehearts about the role in surgical strikes. So this is what is called the end of professionalism, because the army is getting politicized. Now, the next anniversary, the anniversary of this surgical strikes, the government celebrated what is called the Vijay Parv, where at 53 locations in the country, it was celebrated as victory. And Prime Minister Modi also went to one of the stations, the Jodhpur military station, to participate in that. So once we had done this, it was only natural that the Indian Air Force would go and do the Balakot 2019 Balakot air attacks, which they called Operation Bandar, is the name they gave. Now again, you are taking the Air Force to hit non-military targets, saying that these are terrorists we are going to hit. You are unable to do any damage assessment. You are unable to bring back and tell us what actually the terrorist also you have killed. You get in at night from an area where the radar coverage of the enemy is minimal. No country can have a 24/7 radar coverage unless a threat or a war is imminent. No country does that. So we went in, we did this, and there was no damage assessment. Now, the next day when they retaliated, the Pakistan Air Force with their Operation Swift retort, then it was done in broad daylight. We accepted that this was an act of war. We did nothing. In the bargain, factually, one of our pilots was captured. There was an incident where we lost our own helicopter. This all happened. The point here is very simple. Then it came to light thereafter that look, the Air Force when it did that, our electronic warfare was weak. Our communications were jammed by the Pakistan Air Force. The Indian Air Force did not have the networks. They still don't have the airborne networks. They don't have the space networking. I mean, but why? And how do you then pit yourself against, if you still don't have all these, against the PLA, which today has intelligence thinking autonomous networks, data links. Not only that, it has got software defined communications, which basically means that they can hop the frequencies, they can change the frequencies whenever they want. This is the level of their preparedness. So how to meet a challenge like this? Shockingly, this was explained how to meet the challenge by Air Chief Marshal Dhanua, who had done this Operation Bandar. After retirement in December 2020, speaking at the Military Literature Festival in Chandigarh, he came up with this theory. He said that look, first of all, there will be limited war between, of course, he was talking against the backdrop of the Ladakh standoff and how to take on the PLA Air Force. That was the subject. He said that first of all, it will be a limited war. Now, limited war is exactly what Prime Minister had said in 2014, that full-scale wars will not happen. Now, how he came to the conclusion limited war? Because this is something the stronger party will decide, in this case the PLA. Now, the best thing is, on record he said that neither we have the capability to take over Lhasa, nor can the PLF take Leh. So it will be basically a matter of perception that both sides can declare victory and they can show that, so optics basically. Now the question here is perception of victory. When he said, does a professional chief talk like this? Is he looking for a perception of victory? Is he looking for optics, or is he actually looking for war preparedness? This is the challenge. And still these people say that the military or the army is not politicized. Now, I'll take you further. We've had this 10 months of standoff with the PLA. CDS General Rawat is still going strong with his military reforms. Now, what are these military reforms? These are the reforms of the 80s, where, as I said, the army will be in the lead. We are pitted against the PLA, which is talking of an absolutely new war. And just to give an idea to the viewers, what is the difference or the gap between the two wars, the war that they will fight and the war we will fight, let me explain in terms of speed of war. This is the important indicator. Since the Indian army will be in the lead, the Indian speed of war, operating war, will be the speed of the soldier. Speed at which he is moving, mounted or dismounted. Now this is pitted against the technology of the PLA. The speed of the operating speed of the PLA will be 3 to 4 times the speed of sound or the speed of light. There is a comparison? They will be using their hypersonic missiles, they will be using their cyber weapons moving at the speed of light. They will be using their supersonic cruise missiles, their lasers, high-powered microwaves electromagnetic railguns, long range cannons, you name it. And then they have those intelligent thinking networks. So, are we realizing all this? I mean, does the CDS realize all this? That what is going on? Now, recently there was another commanders conference where the reports are saying, now we don't know whether it has been said, but the reports are saying that the Prime Minister spoke about indigenization of traditions and customs of the Indian Army. What does it mean? I mean, the only thing I understand what is happening in the public space is Hinduization. Now, in what shape that will show up in the Indian Army, I don't know. But my worry is that first the professionalism, where is the professionalism? Why are you going ahead with this two-front war thinking? As far as I am concerned, I have been saying that look, it is no longer a two-front war. Please give up this thinking. It is a reinforced one-front war. Make sure you understand that if there is a war with either India, with either Pakistan or China, both will be in it in some way. It's a reinforced one-front war. We have to get back to professionalism. Thank you so much.